My name is Serafina Wren, and at 42 years old, I never imagined that one completely ordinary evening would quietly redirect the course of my life. People often believe life-changing moments arrive with grand announcements, a phone call that changes everything, a dramatic accident, or a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But I've learned that the moments capable of transforming your heart rarely make any noise at all. Sometimes they arrive disguised as the smallest interruptions to an ordinary day. If someone had told me a year earlier that a simple knock on my front door would become the beginning of one of the most meaningful chapters of my life, I would have smiled politely and dismissed it as another sentimental fantasy. Back then, my world had become painfully predictable. I lived alone in a quiet neighborhood tucked just outside Ashland, Oregon, where tall pine trees stood like silent guardians along narrow streets, and neighbors often waved from a distance before disappearing back into their own peaceful routines. It was the kind of place where mornings began with birdsong, evenings settled into comforting stillness, and the loudest sound after sunset was usually the wind weaving through the branches. Many people would have called it peaceful. To me, it often felt unbearably lonely. Silence had become the soundtrack of my life. Some mornings, I welcomed it. There was something calming about sipping fresh coffee while watching fog drift across my backyard, with nothing demanding my attention except the gentle purring of my gray cat, Willow. Those quiet moments allowed me to breathe. But on other days, that same silence echoed through every room of my house like a painful reminder of everything I had lost. The walls seemed too large. The rooms felt too empty. Even the ticking clock in the hallway sounded louder than it should have. 3 years earlier, my marriage had quietly come to an end. My former husband, Thaddeus Vale, wasn't a cruel man. He never betrayed me. There wasn't another woman waiting in the background. There were no explosive arguments that shattered dishes or ended with someone storming out of the house. In many ways, I almost wished there had been. At least then, I could have pointed to one terrible moment and said, "That's where everything fell apart." Instead, our marriage unraveled so slowly that neither of us noticed how far apart we'd drifted until there was almost nothing left to save. We stopped asking each other how our days had gone. Conversations became short. Dinner became quiet. The laughter that had once filled our home disappeared so gradually that we couldn't remember the last time we genuinely smiled together. We became experts at existing under the same roof without truly sharing a life. Two people sleeping inches apart while feeling miles away. Eventually, our home no longer felt like a place built on love. It felt like a waiting room where both of us were silently counting the days until someone finally admitted the truth. When we signed the divorce papers, there were no raised voices, no courtroom drama, no bitter accusations. Just two exhausted people acknowledging that they had already said goodbye long before the paperwork made it official. Walking out of that attorney's office wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part came afterward. It was returning to a house that suddenly felt far too quiet. It was setting only one plate on the dinner table. It was waking up every morning with no one to say good morning to. People often ask whether divorce feels like heartbreak. For me, it felt more like learning to live inside an echo. Life moved forward, but it no longer felt alive. I buried myself in work because work didn't ask difficult questions. As a freelance manuscript editor, I spent my days helping authors strengthen their novels, polishing dialogue, correcting mistakes, and shaping beautiful endings for stories that weren't mine. There was something strangely ironic about it. Every day, I helped strangers tell meaningful stories while quietly forgetting how to live my own. My mornings always began the same way. Coffee brewing in the kitchen. My laptop opening before sunrise, emails waiting to be answered, deadlines waiting to be met. Hours disappeared almost without notice as I lost myself inside chapters written by people I'd never meet. By evening, my shoulders ached, my coffee had long gone cold, and Willow would curl herself beside me on the couch, as though reminding me I wasn't completely alone. She became more than a pet. She became my routine, my companion, the only living soul who greeted me every morning and every night. Looking back now, I wouldn't say my life was unhappy. It simply lacked color. Nothing terrible happened. Nothing exciting happened either. Each day blended into the next until entire weeks disappeared without leaving behind a single memory worth holding on to. I wasn't living. I was simply existing. Then came a cold Thursday evening near the end of October. The weather changed before sunset. Heavy gray clouds swallowed the sky until daylight disappeared hours earlier than usual. Rain slammed against my windows with relentless determination, carried by fierce winds that rattled the old branches outside. The warmth inside my house made the storm feel even lonelier. I glanced at the clock and realized, with some embarrassment, that I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. Work had consumed the entire day. My eyes burned from staring at a screen, my neck was stiff, and every part of me begged for rest. Cooking was completely out of the question. With a tired sigh, I reached for my phone and opened my favorite food delivery app. I scrolled aimlessly through dozens of restaurants: Chinese, Mexican, Thai, burgers. Nothing sounded quite right. Then I found Bella Rosa Trattoria, a small neighborhood Italian restaurant I'd ordered from only once before. Almost immediately, one meal stood out: creamy chicken Alfredo. Warm pasta coated in rich homemade sauce, served with garlic bread fresh from the oven. Exactly the kind of comfort I needed after such a long day. Without thinking twice, I placed the order through Swiftcart delivery. Once the confirmation appeared on my screen, I wrapped myself in my thickest blanket, dimmed the lights, and settled onto the couch beside Willow. The rain continued tapping against the windows, while soft instrumental music played quietly in the background. For the first time that day, I finally allowed myself to relax. About 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Your order has arrived." Almost at the same moment, the doorbell rang. I slipped on my slippers and walked toward the front door, never imagining that the person standing on the other side would become someone I would remember for the rest of my life. I opened the door, and there he stood beneath the warm glow of the porch light. He couldn't have been older than 18. Rainwater streamed from the edge of his hood, dripping onto the wooden steps below. His navy Swiftcart delivery jacket was completely soaked, clinging to his shoulders as though he'd been riding through the storm for hours. Small droplets slid down his face, and his dark hair was plastered to his forehead, yet somehow his expression remained bright. In one hand, he carefully held my paper bag of food, shielding it beneath his jacket so it wouldn't get wet. It was such a small gesture, but it told me everything I needed to know about him. He cared. Even after battling the weather, his first concern had been making sure a stranger's dinner arrived safely. When our eyes met, he smiled. Not the forced smile employees wear because they're expected to, a real one, the kind that reaches your eyes. "Good evening," he said politely. "Delivery for Serafina Wren?" "That's me," I replied with a smile as I accepted the bag. For a second, I couldn't stop looking at him. His sneakers were covered in mud. Water dripped steadily from his sleeves onto the porch floor. His hands looked red from the cold. "You must be freezing," I said instinctively. He glanced toward the rain and gave a soft laugh. "I've definitely worked on nicer nights." He shrugged as though it didn't matter. The weather wins sometimes. Something about the way he said it made me smile. There was no bitterness, no irritation, no complaint about difficult customers or impossible working conditions. Just quiet acceptance, as though he had already learned a lesson that many adults spend decades trying to understand. Some things simply can't be controlled. You should probably get inside somewhere warm, I said. I will after a few more deliveries. His voice remained cheerful. Hopefully the rain lets up before midnight. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a few bills. You've earned this, I said, holding the money toward him. He looked at the cash before gently shaking his head. I really appreciate it, he said sincerely. But you've already tipped through the app. I blinked. Still, take it. Again, he smiled. No, thank you. Then he added something I didn't expect. Someone else might need your kindness more than I do. For a moment, I simply stared at him. People rarely turn down extra money, especially someone his age, especially someone spending a stormy evening riding from house to house making deliveries. Yet there wasn't even a hint of hesitation in his voice. He wasn't trying to impress me. He genuinely meant it. His kindness wasn't something he performed. It was simply part of who he was. I felt strangely humbled. Well, I said softly, thank you for bringing it all the way out here in this weather. My pleasure. He stepped backward onto the porch, adjusting the straps of the insulated delivery bag resting against his back. I hope your dinner makes your evening a little better. Such an ordinary sentence, yet somehow it landed differently. No one had wished me well in such a sincere way for a very long time. You stay safe out there, I replied. I'll do my best. With one final smile, he turned and walked back into the rain. I stood in the doorway far longer than necessary. He climbed onto his bicycle, pulled his hood tighter against the wind, and pedaled away through sheets of rain until the darkness swallowed him completely. Only then did I close the door. The warmth of the house greeted me again, but somehow it felt different. I carried my dinner into the kitchen and unpacked it slowly. The aroma of garlic, butter, and fresh herbs filled the room almost instantly. Normally, I would have switched on the television to keep myself company while eating. That night, I didn't. Only then did I close the door. The warmth of the house greeted me again, but somehow it felt different. I carried my dinner into the kitchen and unpacked it slowly. The aroma of garlic, butter, and fresh herbs filled the room almost instantly. Normally, I would have switched on the television to keep myself company while eating. That night, I didn't. Instead, I found myself staring out the rain-speckled window, thinking about the young delivery rider, wondering how someone so young could carry himself with such quiet grace. He had every reason to complain. He was soaked, cold, still working long after sunset. Yet somehow he had been the one comforting me. The thought lingered long after dinner was over, even while washing the dishes, even while reading before bed, even after I turned off the lights and climbed beneath the blankets. His smile kept finding its way back into my thoughts, not because he was extraordinary, but because genuine kindness had become so rare that encountering it almost felt surprising. I laughed quietly at myself. You're overthinking this, Serafina, I whispered into the darkness. It was just a delivery. Just a polite young man doing his job. Nothing more. People meet strangers every single day. They exchange a few pleasant words, wish each other well, and never cross paths again. That's how life usually works, or at least, that's what I believed. I had no way of knowing that this brief encounter lasting no more than a few minutes on a rainy October evening, was the first page of a story neither of us saw coming. Sometimes the people who change your life don't arrive with dramatic entrances or unforgettable speeches. Sometimes they simply knock on your door carrying a bag of warm pasta, smile like they've known you forever, and leave behind something far more valuable than the meal they delivered. At the time, I thought he had simply brought me dinner. I would eventually discover he had unknowingly delivered hope.